Morning. If everyone can take a seat, I think we're going to get started so we can try and stay on time. So today we thought we would hold something kind of exciting for you, so we decided not to do this topic and go over legal contracts and forms. That work for anyone? No, we're very excited to talk about this topic today of organizing the new landscape and office design. And just to give you a brief introduction of our esteemed panelists here, I'm AJ Perrone-Wilds. I'm from All Steel, which is a furniture manufacturer based in Muscatine, Iowa. I have a great job for All Steel. A lot of the things that I get to do is kind of track trends and see how work is changing and how the landscape of office design is changing for the needs of businesses. So it's a pretty fun job. We also have Paul with us today.
My name is Paul Cox. I'm a project manager for CRE Mega. We are a full-service commercial real estate firm here in Omaha, if you're not familiar. And we also have a project management division, which is what I do. So as a owner's rep project manager, we work with our clients throughout the entire project process. So typically we like to get involved in the early stages when they're going through lease negotiations. We oversee the entire project through construction, bidding, architecture selection, and then help them coordinate and schedule their move into the facility when everything's complete. So during that process, we'll also maintain an overall project schedule and budget, and then help them with all of the owner items that are typically not involved in a contractor's scope of works, like furniture selection, purchasing, AV, IT infrastructure, things like that.
Thanks, Paul. And we also have Kurt.
And thank you. My name is Kurt Caesar. I'm an architect and senior associate with Holland Basham Architects here in town. I recognize a lot of you out there, so you're probably familiar with HBA and potentially myself. We're a firm of about 35 people. We're off of 49th and Farnham, as most of you probably know. We specialize in a lot of different avenues of architecture, quite honestly, but one of them happens to be open office and corporate offices. We've done a lot of work here in town with Fortune 500 companies, but also across the nation. So I'm here today to provide some input in regards to what the current trends are and what we're seeing in the current office space today and what's projected for the future.
So we thought it would be kind of interesting to have a couple different point of views as we talk about these trends, because we all hear about these things from different angles, and we want to get you some content that you can take back and really use when clients start asking you some of these questions. So what we're seeing, what's changing in the landscape today, there's a lot of things that are changing. We see that work process is changing, the worker expectations, those dang millennials, right, that are coming into the workforce and that are in the workforce, their expectations are changing. We're seeing how technology is giving so much more power to the consumer. We're seeing social media changing what's happening within an organization and what happens with surrounding an organization, the economy, the uncertainty, design, how we just had a speaker in Iowa last night about the downtown project. It's the project that Tony Hsieh helped fund in downtown Las Vegas, not the Strip, but downtown Las Vegas, and how they've completely revitalized to help increase creativity to the Zappos employees. And so it's this combination of just not a company, but also that community and how it connects, and also sustainability and the other human factors. But we're not going to cover all those things today because that's a lot. So we've just kind of decided to go into 3 topics that we're going to spend time on. The first one is how work and business strategies are changing the design of space. We were talking earlier, a lot of times we'll go in and we'll be talking to a client about their culture and what they're doing, and then we walk through their space and go, this doesn't match. This is nothing like who you should be. And so that's the opportunity, because we're seeing a lot of, and you probably are as well, a lot of diversity of what a company says it wants to do or become, or the culture it is, and where it really is in their workplace design. The human factors that are influencing design decisions, and this is becoming more and more relevant, especially it's not just a one-size-fits-all and how many people can you smash into a space. It's how productive are they, how effective are they, how loyal are they to that company, and is it a good working environment for them. And then my favorite topic is trends that are real and what is hype. always love getting these little media sound bites of sitting is the new smoking, right? And then your clients hear these things and go, well, no one should sit down. And you're like, okay, well, that's going to be tiring. Nobody can sit down in the office. So what's really true, and what are some of those aspects that you can talk intelligently to your client about? So the first thing that we're going to talk about is how work and business strategies are changing the design of the space. And we're going to give you some visual aids and then have a little bit of a conversation around it. But this is one of my favorite quotes. Culture eats strategy for breakfast. Culture is so important for a company, and they could have the best strategy, they could have the best financial resources, but if that culture isn't right for them, that company will fail, and we've seen it happen. So some of the things that we're seeing are somewhat of a shift in space allocation. So if I can explain these floor plans, this floor plan is looking at what we saw every day 10, 15, 20 years ago. Everyone had a private office surrounding the glass. The core was all workstations. They were the one-size-fits-all. There was no natural light in the core of the building, right? So we kind of call that the legacy, and we still see a lot of that out there. Then current, or what we've seen the trend, especially LEED has pushed this, is that we've brought all the offices from the surrounding perimeter inside towards the core, and now we have workstations throughout the space. And everyone's sharing the natural light, but it's still somewhat of a one-size-fits-all kind of entity. And the last space, which I think is the most interesting space, is what we're seeing that's evolving. And when you just look at these plans, the head of our company, All Steel at H&I, being in Iowa, when he looked at this and analyzed, he said, well, this is corn rows, and this is a vegetable garden, right? And that's kind of an easy way to explain it. But it was actually really easy to plan for this, right? And not to offend anybody, but a monkey could do this, right? You know, lay out the perimeter offices and throw some workstations in, and whoo, we're done. That vegetable garden is much, much more diverse and much more complicated from a design standpoint, from a real estate standpoint, and how does that need to look? The other thing that is interesting about these three scenarios, in the legacy, you had a setting, and a setting would be like a private office, a conference room, a board room, a workstation. Those are settings. You would have 6 of those space types in the legacy, whereas current we have 9, evolving is 14. There are new space types that we're talking about, like a concierge lounge, right? You know, who ever heard of a concierge lounge 5 years ago? Or, you know, the cafe isn't just the cafe. You're using that cafe every day for work. There's lots of seats in the front row for any brave people that are standing in the back that would like to have a seat. We don't bite. There might be cash underneath the seat, too. So smart lady, you get the first prize. So that has been interesting to watch how these settings, these space types are changing, and they're changing pretty rapidly. Another emerging space type is auditorium, where we actually see some companies build some sort of a semi-permanent auditorium because when they want to do a lot of town halls, they want to bring people together, and that's very different. The other thing that is notable about these plans is the division between I space and we space, and we're going to get into this in a little bit, this collaboration aspect. But an I space would be your individual space, a we space would be a collaboration space. We saw pretty much an 80-20 rule in the legacy, right? 80% was individual space, 20% was conference. Current, it's about the same, but evolving, it's getting closer to almost a 50-50. And again, that becomes a little bit more complex. When you have more collaboration spaces, you also have more technology needs, and you have different costs in different areas. So a lot of times when we're working with designers, sometimes we see that the budgeting is all screwed up because they're not thinking about the ramifications of more collaboration spaces. You might not need workstations there, but you need more technology and other supports in that space. So besides looking at just floor plans, we're also looking at work. And there's kind of the big conversation between private office and open office, which one is better, right? And now, you know, people are making the Susan Kang introvert private office. They're actually labeling it and throwing it out there, which is a little crazy. But there is this great debate right now between, you know, Do I need to have an enclosed space in a private office, or should I be in an open space? And there's not a perfect solution because it depends. I mean, that's the question. But when we think about what's changed in the last couple years, we used to sit in our workstation in our office and we did all of these things. We did everything there. And it's very interesting when you ask people and you survey them, say, how much are you sitting in your desk? And they say, 95% of the time I'm sitting in my desk. And when you're actually surveying them and you occupancy sensor them or you videography them, they're really about 40 or 50%. So, you know, just in their mind, they think they're there because if I'm at my desk, I'm working, which is not necessarily true. What we're seeing is that you can still have your home base, but there's a lot of activities that you might need for deep focus and deep thinking, and that can be done somewhere else within the building or outside the building. A lot of times my favorite question to ask people is, where were you when you had your best idea? Or when you really needed to write a report, where do you go when you need to do that? And 9 times out of 10, it's home. And unless they have children, and lots of crazy children, and dogs and cats, But a lot of times they're going somewhere else, or they're staying late when everyone leaves, so no one interrupts them, so that it can deep focus. And then you also have the collaboration aspect. And there's places that you need to plan and brainstorm and socialize, and we're going to talk about all these things. And it doesn't all have to happen at your desk. Your desk can be your home base, and as long as there's places within that community of environment that you can go to do that, and they have a choice to go those places, you can still be very productive. So I'm going to ask these guys a couple questions about all of this stuff that we've just kind of talked about. Kurt, what are you seeing when you're talking with some of your clients of some of these attributes and things that they're concerned about?
It's very interesting. Today, you are starting to see, even locally, companies' culture is really ever changing, and it's changing quicker than it ever has before. We're seeing clients that come to us and say, we have a problem, and we'll see a client here in a few minutes that's a prime example of this. We have a problem. Our culture is this. We're trying to recruit millennials. We understand that we've got baby boomers in our office, but we're trying to recruit millennials, and we've got this culture that's exciting, that's fun, but you walk into their office and you look at the atmosphere that they're in, it's not it. That's not it. When a millennial comes in for a job interview and walks around, it's not exciting. So they're reaching out to us to really understand, how do we achieve this, and but not how do we achieve it just for the millennials, but how do we appease everybody? So it's really an interesting time period in design, and quite honestly, office and corporate culture to really be a part of this. Really, what we're starting to see too as well is an understanding that these collaborative work environments are also more efficient. So the days of a typical worker taking maybe 300 square feet now could be 150. So your leasable space is smaller. So times are changing. It's interesting.
So Paul, a little bit on attraction and retention. Are you getting that is a top need again for clients? I mean, during the recession, we didn't hear about it as much because people were getting laid off all the time. But what are you hearing now?
Yeah, I think kind of like Kurt said, in order for a company or an organization to really attract that kind of next demographic of workforce, it's important that, they're looking for office space that is modern, is open, is bright colors, is welcoming. And when if you go through a company and everything on paper could look great, and you tour the office for the first time and it's old workstations, tall panels, bad lighting, no matter what they pay you, people are rejecting those jobs, and they'd rather go somewhere, get paid less, but work in a more fun environment.
Right. So I'm going to tee you right up for the next slide, because we actually have a video that Paul is letting us use about a space that CBRE did in Chicago. Can you talk a little bit about what they're going to see?
Yep. So CBRE just opened a new office in downtown Chicago, and it was designed around a new workplace strategy that they're rolling out called Workplace 360. And they've done this in 11 offices in the United States and then a handful of their international offices so far. And I thought this is a great clip that kind of shows the progressive side of where workplace design is going. And a few kind of key points. They've gone almost entirely paperless. It's, you know, the open collaborative concept, but it's also a free address work environment. And what that means is employees no longer have a designated office or workstation. They come in the morning, and they're really free to sit anywhere they want and work for the day. So we'll play this and have a couple statistics to share afterwards.
When I visited the Los Angeles office, I anticipated what was coming when an employee there looked at me and says, you know, I really love coming to work now.
A lot of us are really proud to be here and proud of what we've created.
Having such an open space, it's changed everything dramatically.
The ability to work across multiple business lines is certainly the way of the future, and I think that we're on the cutting edge of doing that.
It really speaks to the fact that we're a world-class organization. We're the largest commercial real estate firm in Chicago. We've made a significant investment in this community.
What I really didn't expect was how invigorating the environment it was.
People were blown away by the overall design. Obviously the views, the natural light, but also the nuances in the space that allow people to see each other.
You literally see people that you haven't seen, meet people that you haven't met. Having that environment change, it kind of gives you a shot in the arm as opposed to just going to that same office every day, doing the same thing each day.
As we began to design the space, it became clearer and clearer to us that we needed to go as far along the spectrum as possible. Not only making a statement to that effect in the marketplace, but allowing for this space again to do the things that we want it to be able to do, not just today, but 10 years from now.
We've deployed a concierge-based model. Your first exposure to CRE Chicago is a trained professional. It's somebody who's there to help facilitate business for the day, to get your guests or your clients situated, and also to cater to the employees so that the day is much more productive and efficient.
Part of our process in enhancing the technology around the space were moving all of our paper files up to being digitalized.
Going through a process where we scanned and archived paper files, 85% of them were outright purged and weren't needed to bring with them or to archive.
Even the more senior members of the team who are more used to working with paper felt liberated through that whole process.
We've had to evolve our thinking when we saw how our people behave in an environment where they're not tethered to paper, where they're not tethered to one fixed address.
Very simply, we're more accessible to one another. And that in itself will facilitate faster decision-making, business case strategies, planning, so that we can respond to our clients' needs faster.
One of the biggest misconceptions is really about the open work environment and how that's not a great solution in terms of productivity for employees. And while our work environment certainly is open, there's still a major part of the space that's also enclosed.
A benefit of a free address environment is that that private space and enclosed space is available to everyone.
There's a lot of individual technology that is supporting everybody at the desktop and really actually supporting the free address environment that we have. Some of that is really this extension mobility, which is really fantastic. You have your own headset and you just come in every morning, and wherever you're sitting, that phone becomes your phone. The key to it is that the technology works regardless of where you are. Oblong is both a presentation and a collaboration technology. It's a way for us to not only present in a much more interactive way with our clients, but also to collaborate when we're creating presentations or really just creating ideas.
Every single person of our organization in Chicago touched this in some way. Hundreds and hundreds of people ultimately had their thumbprint on this, and they made this a success.
I think the message that we're sending is the one that we're also delivering in the marketplace, which is that we are an industry leader in terms of thought around real estate strategy. And if you look at our workplace strategies business, it's one of the fastest growing businesses that we have. We're considered a market leader in that concept. And what better way to demonstrate that than to actually walk the walk, which is what we've done here and what we're doing around the world now with this new occupancy strategy.
So we'll let Paul, some comments that you would like to.
So I thought that was a really good example and kind of hit on a lot of the different aspects of kind of the new progressive design where we see things going, the technology, the furniture solutions, the free address environment. So I wanted just real quick kind of ask you guys, show of hands, how many people would like to work in a workplace that had the free address setup?
Raise your hand.
Raise your hand. Right, so not very many at all. I think that's kind of the big hurdle. If we go to the next slide, so they did a post-occupancy survey of all the employees after they've rolled out this new plan. They've been in there, they've worked for a while, and personally, I was really surprised at the high level of positive feedback. I mean, as you can see, everything's in upper 80s, 90 percentile. For example, 93% said they would not go back to that old way of working. So even though it seems like a drastic change, maybe if you're in a kind of a legacy environment, office setting, but this is what employees are wanting. This is where things are going in the future. And one of the other ones, the 83% agree or strongly agree that they're able to find spaces for private or focused work. And when I talk to clients, we talk about the potential of having an open workplace. One of their major concerns, we hear it all the time, is what do we do if we need to have a private conversation? Or what do we do if an employee needs to work on a report and not be disturbed? I think the key thing to remember is even in an open workplace environment, there are spaces built in for these private tasks. And that's really, kind of what the architects help with. And it's not just a purely open office where you have absolutely no privacy.
So kind of looking at this, this would be on the more progressive end. If we say this is conservative, this is probably more progressive. But, Kurt, maybe you can talk a little bit about what you see in the area, because some people's reaction might be, oh, this will never come to, Omaha or Lincoln. We're too conservative for that. So tell us about what you've been seeing in the industry.
Do you mind flipping the slide one? Because that leads right into this.
Very good.
Actually, good lead in. It's very interesting. As Paul was saying, one of the hardest psychological impacts that we have to deal with is change. People don't like change. Okay? So it's very hard to take somebody from this to a workplace 360 atmosphere. That said, we were just recently able to work with a company here in town that some of you might be familiar with, Medical Solutions. They're a nurse staffing company that were originally on North 90th, was it, Paul? Yeah, North 90th, and they moved to a building just northwest of the Westroads. This was their existing space. So what we found is this was a company that came to us and said, you know what? This is a prime example. This is our culture. This is what we're really forward thinking. We want to project a fun atmosphere. Then, Paul and I got a chance to go visit their space, and this is what we saw. And it's fun. There's a lot of trinkets everywhere. I mean, everybody loves, they had ticker tape, and I mean, there was stuff hanging everywhere. But it was because they were forcing culture upon an office setting that was, quite honestly, atrocious. So really working with clients that have this vision, they came to us and said, we understand that, we love Google, we love Yahoo, we love Zappos, those are the common big three that people that reference, but they understand, we don't want to slide in our space or a pit of balls, I mean, some clients say they do, but that's not what they were going for. They understood they didn't want to be that progressive. But they had these ideas and thoughts that, we understand we're here, we want to be there, but we don't know how to get there. So if we go to the next slide, actually, if you don't mind. So we eventually got them there. And it was really a balance, quite honestly. There's a lot of different spaces that you can create with this kind of workplace 360 concept. But here, this was more of a balance. But it's a prime example of a project that's kind of in the middle range because they have a large portion of their facility is basically a call center. And you can see this right here. These are workstations. There's tall edges on the ends, but the people that sit in their teams, respectively, have shorter dividers, so they can still work as a team within their team. But they understand that acoustics are still an issue. We can still solve that, but you can see, look at the volume of that space. The floor to floor in that building was very low. We opened the space, we painted it white. We floated ceilings only where we needed it to control acoustical value. But it was an open space. Go ahead and advance again. But what they were really, really excited about was creating more conference rooms that weren't conference rooms, that were more what I've coined more so as huddle spaces. And those are spaces where you don't have a table and 15 people aren't sitting around that table. As you see here, it's soft seating, which promotes a totally different type of conversation. No different than where we are today. Everybody's sitting right here. This is what we would call a typical classroom setting. It's very one-dimensional. We're teaching you because we're up at the front. Whereas if we manipulated and moved these chairs around a little differently and we were free to walk around the middle of the room, it changes the entire dynamic of the conversation that's happening. Whereas in this space here, this is exactly what they were going for. They wanted to change the dynamic. They wanted to be a little less structured. So there's a series of conference rooms throughout their space that are just like this, that are huddle rooms, for just to have a conversation, or to go sit down and work outside of your workstation. Go ahead.
Paul, you worked on this project as well. What challenges did you see that they had to overcome?
Well, one of the interesting kind of issues we had to work through is typically when you're talking about a new space as the owner's rep, you're dealing with the executives of that company, and they're typically making the decisions about the new design. They're picking the furniture. They're kind of dictating what spaces they want. But to go from their old space to the new space, we talked with their executive group and encouraged them to select a handful of employees, kind of, a couple from each department, and have them involved in the entire process. And that was somewhat new for me, and Kurt, kind of helped us through that process also. But it's a fine balance because you want to get employee input, but you don't want too much employee input, right? Because it can just go way out in left field. So that was kind of how we got to this, and we got feedback from employees that...
That's when you end up with a pit of balls.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. Yep. So I think that's just something to kind of keep in mind that early on, and it ties back to kind of the real estate process, and when they're looking for spaces, who's the decision makers, and how do you want to navigate that client through the process?
But what's interesting, to close this, because I don't want to talk about this forever, but if you go and you talk to these folks now about their space, they absolutely love it. They did a good job of prepping their employees moving into this space. Even through construction, they'd hold parties in the construction space. Just bring all the employees over while it's under construction, and show pictures. And we had renderings and floor plans posted of where their area was, and it got them all excited about it. But it's really fun. You walk through their space now, and you know what you don't see now is all the knickknacks. They're gone.
The Monopoly board is
The
gone?
Monopoly boards, all the figurines, whatever it is, the toys that they have, they're gone now because the space itself now is their culture. They didn't have to create culture by bringing in all their stuff. It's now their office space.
Right. And I think this was a really good example of how that workplace strategy has now complemented their business strategy, and it's that culture is reflected. And that's a very hard thing to do because especially you're dealing with humans. So now we're going to talk about the fun part. And I think this has become a real challenge in design, is that we're talking about human beings and we're talking about how to motivate them and get them excited and to be in a culture. And there's a lot of different things that come along with that. So, the hot topic for that has been the fight, I will say, between I space and we space, and what's right for that culture. many times we have an organization that they're taking people out of private offices and they want them in that open plan because they want more collision, they want more creativity, they want more innovation. And I've literally had a few people go to therapy about losing their door. Okay? I'm not kidding. And so that's a very big change for people. And I'm going to let Kurt talk a little bit about some work that they've done for John Deere and what they've had to worry about on the collaboration end of things. So go ahead.
I know graph seems very exciting, but I'll try to make this as fun as possible. So we've been fortunate enough, HBA has, to work with John Deere as a client for almost 20 years now. And almost as far back as maybe 15 years ago, they were already starting to look at understanding their general office spaces across the country. They understood that their company and business model was becoming ever more global and more mobile because of that. So back then they were starting these studies. Now this is a more recent study, and this is focused on their headquarters in Moline, which is the Quad Cities, eastern Iowa, western Illinois. This focuses on their headquarters space in one building specifically. So this was an observation of 440 seats roughly. And what that means, before I get into this actually, let me preface this by saying, when you go to their headquarters, I remember going there as long as 10 years ago, and you'd walk through their headquarters building. Has anybody been there, by the way? Okay, a few of you. One of the most beautiful buildings you'll ever see. If you ever have time, go look at it. It's beautiful. Anyways, I remember going there 10 years ago, and it was just as AJ was saying before, offices on the perimeter, no daylight to the interior, and it was like crickets walking through the building. It was such an atrocious office setting. Again, I'm using that word again, but it just was not comfortable. But what they were finding was, on any given day, only 50% of their employees were actually there. So if only 50% of your employees are there, and then you do a study like this that says only 50% of the people are actually sitting in their desks at that time, so then you've only got 25% of your employees are actually sitting down at their desk. And you walk through that space, you're totally underutilizing the entire facility. So that began a movement for them, quite honestly. As you see here, this is kind of just a quick study. I'll just go through this really quick. So they studied Monday through Friday, 10 different times a day, and they took measurements, not measurements, but an analysis basically saying who's at their seat and when. So Monday morning obviously was the peak. Everybody's there Monday morning. As you get to Friday afternoon, obviously it tails off. So that's when we're all golfing right here. That said, but what this has driven is what they call their me, not we spaces. So but maybe 3 years ago is when this started. We actually started with a pilot area. We dedicated about 10,000 square feet, I think, in their main office building to a we space. And we converted it, and that went from about 300 square feet a person down to, it's hard to measure now, but it's about 120 to 130 people a square foot. So we've cut that in half. And what they're able to do now is create their own environment, and it changes daily. And it's quite fun to walk through those spaces now. They did that as a test period for about 6 months. Now they're starting to go department by department just in the Quad Cities right now to continue this kind of evolving process. But we're going department by department in every facility and analyzing whether or not they're capable of using this we setting. Because ultimately, globally, what they're trying to do is contract and lessen the amount of lease space that they have across the globe. And they can do so by doing this. And on top of that, create a more fun and open culture. So this is actually one of the we spaces. I chose this photo only because this is kind of somewhat the extreme. This is what they call a micro cafe, and there are several of these in their new we spaces. This is all the existing architecture around there. Really, this was more of a furniture solution. They removed all the offices, and they plug in these type of areas here. But what's fun here, let me grab my pointer really quick. You can advance the slide. Is there's different types of seating. We've been talking about this. But, you've got a little cafe space here. You've got some bench seating here. You've got a couch here. You've got a high top table here. A lot of this is psychological too. We use a lot of these, I call these campfire tables because they're tall. people are more apt to walk up to a higher table and join a conversation and work with each other. Whereas at a lower table like this is a little more private. People aren't going to necessarily join you there. But creating those opportunities as much as possible and creating them throughout the entire space is what they wanted to do. And quite honestly, this has been extremely successful. I will say though, and we're going to get into generational effects, when they first started doing this, baby boomers, because they're so mobile, baby boomers just said, you know what, I don't like this, I'm staying home. And because they could, they did. So now, it's a couple years later, they're slowly coming back. They're seeing that there's benefit to actually utilizing this space, but their first thought was, I don't like it, not going to do it. And because their corporate culture allowed that, it was fine. They went home. But it's changing. It's an evolving trend, and it's really exciting to see and be a part of.
So one of the things that really have struck me about these pictures, as Kurt has been talking about this project for a while, when I look at these, it reminds me so much of like a Marriott courtyard, right? There's a whole hospitality aspect of supporting work. And this morning when I was at the Marriott courtyard and stopping at a tall table to eat my muffin and waiting for my person to come and pick me up, I kind of sat there and I looked, everybody that was in there was a business traveler. There was no family, there was no nothing, and everyone was in suits, and there was I was like, I could be in a corporate headquarters right now. There was really, the feeling that it was at a hotel, right? It could be at a corporate headquarters. I mean, it was just, we're seeing so much of that kind of hospitality, concierge, infiltrate into the workspace. One of my questions for you is, if we go back to this secret slide, we call it the secret slide because this is not getting published. It's confidential.
Nobody's seeing this today.
Yeah. So pretend
if you talk to anybody from
you
John
haven't
Deere.
seen this, okay? But we thought it was really helpful. A portion of these people are travelers. So what's the ratio for John Deere of how many people have an occupied, a 1-to-1 ratio, and how many of them are just travelers there?
And that goes back to kind of what I was originally discussing. Deere sees that on a general day in their headquarters in that area, and this is common throughout the world for them, quite honestly, is again, there are only 40% to 50% occupied at any given time because there's that many travelers. So again, when we're looking at 439 seats, and this says an average occupancy of 50%, let's just say, it's really only 25% loaded when you do the math backwards. So they're traveling more and more. So technology is important, and having these flexible but technology-rich spaces is extremely important.
So this is a question I have for you, Paul. A lot of times when we're working with clients and they're doing more of this traveler space, we're seeing that as the company grows, instead of adding on to the space or adding more real estate, they're looking to mobility programs. They're looking to having people not have a fully assigned space. Are you starting to see any of that here, any of that requests?
Honestly, not quite yet. I think we've had clients that are kind of starting to learn about it and hear about it, through news reports and other things. But, so far in Omaha, I haven't worked on a project that they've specifically asked for kind of design concepts around having a mobile workforce.
Right. How about you, Kurt?
I wanted to add one more, not to that.
Oh, okay.
Sorry. I wanted to expand on this because one of the biggest concerns and questions that we get when we show people this is, well, where do I store all my stuff? Where do my files go? And what's really interesting is when you walk around Deere's headquarters now, you see grown men walking around with backpacks all over the place. I've gotten used to it now, but it's so different the first time you go out there. Some of our employees will go out there for the first time and they're like, what the heck? There's a 60-year-old man over there carrying a backpack. It's like, well, that's how they work now. And you're seeing that locally. It's
a backpack right over there.
There's a backpack right over there. But that's all your stuff is there. They have centralized storage now that you come in. It's lockable.
Right.
It's in one area. You pull out the stuff you need for the day, and you go off.
It's very interesting. So one of the things that I think ties into that is we talk a lot about generationals, but it's the millennials. I mean, it really is about the millennials because they're such a big force. And what we're seeing, for those of you, and there can be no fighting over if I'm a Gen Xer or a baby boomer, because, you know, these are never perfect for the years. So you can put yourself wherever you want. We're not going to stereotype you. If you want to be a Gen Xer or a millennial, go for it, okay? You know, everybody has kind of these different notions. But what we do know is there's a lot of baby boomers, and the baby boomers are starting to retire. It's interesting, a lot of projects that we get on, and they're going to move, we see kind of mass exoduses of the baby boomers, because if they have to start changing their work style and changing their place, they're like, this might be a good time to retire. You know, I am 66. I'm not going to survive this. So we've been walking through the project, through the buildings of the old spaces, you know, trying to, you know, get things ready. And there's retirement signs everywhere on every floor. Come have cake for Paul's retirement. And it's just like, I'm like, oh my gosh, how many people are retiring? A lot. The problem is there's not enough Gen Xers, you know, my generation, the slacker generation. I love that. But there's just not enough of us. And so the millennials, which are really, I mean, I have a millennial. I have a 19-year-old who's really at the very, very end of the millennial. But him and his friends, you know, they're either in college or they're in the workforce, or they are in the workforce right now. And what we're seeing is millennials are rising and filling a lot of the roles that Gen Xers are, because there's not enough Gen Xers. And they think very, very differently. The Gen Xers, it's interesting because we were talking about this earlier. Like, I have a 6-year-old besides the 19-year-old. Long story, same husband. But it's, just if you're wondering. But it is like having him born in 2 different centuries. You know, I remember like having my son, and there was no credit card sweeper at the gas station. So, and there was no carry-on baby carrier. So you had to take the baby out, you had to go in the gas station, you have to pay for it. I mean, it was such a pain, and the baby was sleeping. And now, I mean, it's totally different. And at 18 months old, my daughter had an iPad, and she knew how to do things. And I was telling them at 3, she wanted to go to Teddy Bear Park, and I did not want to go to Teddy Bear Park. And I said, oh, it's not open yet. We don't have time to go today. And she went up to Siri, when is Teddy Bear Park open? And thank God it was closed, because we would have been going to Teddy Bear Park that day. But this aspect of, you know, what the new generations are going to be looking for and wanting, and we had an expert in yesterday on generations and the millennials, and she does a series for NPR on the millennial generations, and it is all about authenticity, and also having vulnerability. Now, you think of those 2 words, authenticity you can understand in a company, but vulnerability in a company is looked at as something, not as an asset. It is looked at as a huge threat. And so that's why you're having some of these, you know, how they're perceiving brands and how brands are performing. I come from the land of Target. I grew up in Target number 1. When I was 3, I was going to Target number 1. And when I was in high school, that was, I mean, we spent so much money on Target. And Target is now failing. But when you talk to that generation, they put Target and Walmart in the same bucket. You know, they don't care that they give 5% back to the community. They don't care. It's the same bucket. So how does that change how when these millennials are working and they want that transparency and they want to know certain things and they don't want to wear a suit and they want that culture to be more open and they want to be able to swear? Things like that. So, just saying. So Paul found this great slide, and I'm going to let him talk a little bit about what CBRE has shown in some of their research.
Yeah, so I thought this was kind of just an interesting chart. So CBRE went and did a survey with employees, and they broke it out by demographics, right? Millennials, Generation X, baby boomers. And they asked them what value did they place on the enhancements in the workplace. So spaces to think, spaces to socialize, spaces to meet, and then spaces for learning. And you can see that, you know, 3 out of the 4 are fairly close, right? I thought that there might have been a bigger discrepancy between the millennials and the baby boomers. But if you look at spaces to socialize, the second one, that's really where you see the kind of biggest gap between those 2 age demographics now, right? So baby boomers, only 10% really care about a space to socialize at work. We're at work, we're here to work, we're not here to socialize. Where you can see millennials, you know, 31%, that is an important aspect of a work environment. So, which makes sense, right? Millennials are social media, they're connected all the time, their phone's with them, email. So I think kind of the takeaway for me with this is it's important to design a workplace that caters to all three demographics, because so many things are similar across all three that you can't put emphasis, solely on we're designing our new office just for millennials, because you're going to really be leaving out, Generation X and the baby boomers.
And it's interesting because when you say socialize, what does that look like in a workspace? Is that having a pool table or a ping pong table? And I think it's more than that for this generation. However, being said that, we did install a ping pong tournament room in the center of a company, and the CEO was kind of mortified when he figured out how much real estate was being allotted, because you had to have the stands and you had to have the tournaments that you could watch both at the same time. Interesting, but there was only 100 people too. So, being said that, what does socialization look like in a design in a space? And, Kurt, maybe you could talk to that a little bit of, what are you seeing people trying to do in a space to make it more of a mentoring or communication or collaboration?
Yeah, it's, just as you said, the obvious is let's put a game table out, a pool table, a tennis table, table tennis. Those are very obvious, and they're happening more and more. That Med Solutions project has a game room. It has a massage room, has a nap room. I mean, I want to work there now, but I can't. But so there's that aspect, or there's really minor things that, quite honestly, these are the things that we actually do in our own office, is the fact that, we start to take down the boundaries and the dividers between each one of us as we work. So we're more of a benching configuration rather than workstation to workstation. And that really changes the way that we work from day to day. And honestly, if you walk into our office at a given time, yeah, you might run into some people just kind of jacking around a little bit. But you know what? That's because that's good. That means that your culture is appropriate. People enjoy coming to work. We're going to be more efficient because we enjoy who we're surrounded with. But if we were in walls and we had offices, that wouldn't happen. People don't collaborate. People won't talk to each other. So creating that creates that synergy that culture can build off of.
And don't you think, as much as mobility programs are around and people like that aspect of working at home, people still need to connect with people. And it's funny because my husband's in IT. He's an IT programmer, and he works kind of 24/7, because those guys do. And he wanted to go into work today, even though he had to get up at 2 o'clock in the morning to launch something, so he got an hour of sleep, and we have a sick kid who's tentatively sick. And meaning he sent her to school, but they'll probably get a phone call that he needs to go and get her, but that's what guys do. So I said, why don't you work from home today? And he's like, I don't want to work from home today. I'm like, why not? Nobody's there. But he likes going in to be social. He likes talking to his friends. He likes connecting with people. He has an hour-and-a-half commute. And I'm like, really? This is ridiculous. You're going to drive there for an hour and a half. You're going to get a phone call from school, and then you're going to drive back an hour and a half. So he's staying home, but he's pouting. So, but it's the fact that he needs that, because he needs to be connected with people, especially the more computer-driven jobs there are. You still need to get together and have that collaboration. So we're going to lead right into, how many of you have heard of the WELL standard? Has anybody heard of this? So as LEED came onto the market and took it by storm, and we all had to become LEED accredited and understand what this all was, this is kind of the next LEED. So LEED addresses a lot of things, but there's a lot of holes in it. And I used to teach LEED, so I know where the holes are. And a lot of it surrounds the human aspects and the human factors. So what the WELL standard done, and CBRE has been really, they had the very first project that was the first WELL standard project. And you can see President Clinton, Deepak Chopra, all these big name people are way behind this. This is a movement. And what it really is doing, it's looking about the enhanced human health and well-being in a space, in a culture. So this is the WELL standard. And you look at this, and some of these things we've been addressing for a while, especially in LEED, like air quality, water quality, light, how much natural light is. But things like, what are people eating? Especially for the companies that are self-insured, you're like, okay, we're worried about everybody's blood pressure, and we want you to get screenings, and oh, by the way, if you're too fat or if you're smoking or if you drink too much, we're going to put you on a program, right? Because they're all self-insured. But then you go to their break room, and their break room machines are full of Ho-Hos and Twinkies. I mean, what's the problem here? You know, and so the companies are starting to look at this, and I have a company that brings in fresh fruit every day and offers it for free for people. You're seeing people, you know, trying to get to use the stairs more and all that kind of stuff. But then the very top is where I really am very intrigued about, is that mind issue. Because you could build the most beautiful building and has yoga and relaxation, and maybe there's a fountain, and it's just very kumbaya. But if you have a manager that is horrible and you hate your job, your mind is not going to be in the right place. You will have undue amount of stress. You will have a heart attack or something else that will be caused from the stress. And so none of that made a difference, right? So that culture has to be spun in that. And the millennials really get this. The millennials really understand this. And so it's looking at that building in a little bit different way. And I have one of the facets we want to talk about quick, because I don't want to spend too much time, but like fitness centers. What are you guys seeing with should we have a fitness center, or is it too expensive? What are some of the ramifications from a real estate standpoint?
So back to the example project medical solutions that we completed. When we were doing the initial fit plans for the space, they were kind of dead set on, we absolutely want to have a fitness center in our office. Our old space, we couldn't have one. We have, you know, kind of a blank canvas. Let's build it, let's put it in. And when we were working with the architect, with Kurt, and we were doing, you know, kind of layouts and space planning, that was really expensive real estate to use for a fitness center. And if we kind of came to the conclusion that if we built that in, it would eliminate a lot of the future growth for employees. And then you add in the cost of not only construction of the fitness center, but the equipment, maintenance, and it adds up very quickly. And they kind of pivoted and decided that it makes much more sense for us financially as a company to help subsidize employees a gym membership, right? And there's a gym just around the block. So that's what we ended up doing.
Very, very quickly to piggyback on that, what we do see, I mean, from an architectural standpoint, from a site planning standpoint, you do see corporate users wanting to know where the nearest fitness facility is to their property. That's very new. I mean, that's within the last 3 years, people are concerned about that. And that's because they're starting to subsidize those memberships.
Mm-hmm.
John Deere is starting to biometrically test their employees and their employees' spouses for insurance reasons. It's a different world.
It's a little scary. A little scary. Do you have a question?
Yeah, a couple questions. From a landlord perspective, with an existing building, how amenable are they to reconfiguring the space and release probabilities later down the road?
In regarding to like fitness centers, or?
No, in general, the WeSpace concept.
Oh, the WeSpace concept.
All right, in regards to how easy is it to retrofit, is that what you're getting? Actually, it's really not a problem, because quite honestly, it's just an open office. You know, really what it comes down to is making sure that power and data is where you need it, and that's the biggest driver, is making sure that, one, electrically, you know, your building can handle the loads, because your loads are probably going to increase because now you've got connections all over the place and you want it to be flexible. No, in fact, interesting, you know, you can depreciate furniture. So what's interesting is, as soon as you tell an owner that, they're like, oh, really? And then they're like, well, what can be considered furniture?
A lot.
And you can tow that line a long ways. You know, anymore you can depreciate walls,
right,
you know, that are furniture solutions. So really, it's very easy to retrofit these spaces and for it to be released, because you're really not changing much of the existing infrastructure.
You see planning that's starting to go on a core level where, especially if there's floor cores, it's certain spaces and amounts. And you can see where, from a design team, we're designing all these different types of spaces that could be on that same module, whether it's we or I or a combination. It's just kind of, I call it the Etch-a-Sketch. You like shake the Etch-a-Sketch and it's a different configuration. And so what we see a bigger problem with from a planning standpoint is the mobility issue. Because as you densify in a floor plan, your HVAC issues are changed. If you had your HVAC designed in a space for one person and 800 square feet, and now it's much different, not only just your HVAC, but your parking and some of the infrastructures, the bathroom allotments, that's where we're having companies having more issues with an existing structure.
One of the, I'm currently working on a study for, I hate to keep saying it again, but I'm going to say it again, John Deere. I'm working through understanding if they convert to a WE atmosphere, how that affects their parking. Because quite honestly, if you now double the density, where do you put them? You've got to park them. And in most situations, you're landlocked today. So you hit critical mass based upon how you can park. It's sad, but it's true.
Right. So more questions.
How are landlords responding to in multi-tenant buildings like in Omaha? If your building was built on a 4-to-1 parking ratio, and now you got a tenant where you got a number of tenants that want to occupy space at 5 or 5.5 to 1. Is there a solution that you're seeing, or are landlords just losing tenants because they can't park?
Yes. I mean, quite honestly, you hit the nail on the head, and it's very specific to the user, quite honestly, and when you're specific to the site, because if you're in a dense situation, what do? You got to go up, and only so many owners can really afford vertical solutions with parking.
TJ, you know that the broker always says there's abundant parking.
But we do see a lot of companies that are evaluating, where they're going. How close are they to the, what type of mass transit, what type of bicycle programs, what type of things can you put to get more people to do that, especially when you're looking at the statistics of what the millennials want. More and more of them want to be in the city and go to work in a city and not in the suburbs. And so you have this issue. It's an issue right now that how do you get more people in downtown, but how do you get them in there? Where can they park, or what kind of mass transit can they take? And so I think we're seeing this happen throughout the country, where there's not strong metro solutions for mass transit. People trying to figure out, there's one company that they have a shuttle. They actually have a shuttle that they pay for people to get them in and out, and they park off-site somewhere and they go in on the shuttle.
But you also have to really evaluate the user, because a lot of corporate users will come in and say, we need 4-to-1, we need 5-to-1, we need 4.5 to whatever it may be. But they're really only occupying 60% of their space a day. So do they really need that? No, they think they need that.
Right.
But it's very hard to convince owners that that's the way it is until you really, we've done parking analysis for corporate users and gone and counted cars in their current parking lot 3 times a day for a week just to prove, hey, you're not parking at 4-to-1. Right. You're parking 60% of that.
But I think kind of like what you said earlier, if a tenant or a client is out looking for new space and they want to, design it around their culture, if that building can't meet that needs, they're going somewhere else because they aren't going to not move forward with their culture because of something just like parking.
That's kind of where the rubber meets the road. When you agree, compromise needs to probably be a prerequisite for many long-term serious companies that are in a cultural evolution. And we're not going to see Miracle Hill Business Park being vacated because it can't park
good point. I mean, let's be honest. What's the workplace going to look like in 20 years? Is it this, or are we going to go right back to where we were?
I'll show you what it's going to look like. This is something, all right, this is actually from our Workplace of the Future contest. It's the Oculus, and I saw this and I was like, oh my God, this is amazing, right? There's a contact lens you put in your eye, and then there's this Oculus thing, and you can build things. And it's really, I mean, fascinating to me. But their pitch was, you will no longer need furniture because you can just stand there and build things. And I'm like, BS. People have been sitting in tables and chairs for millions of years. Where are you going to eat? You know, you're not going to have some 80-year-old guy sitting on the floor doing this. But the concept is amazing. Facebook just bought them, just bought this concept, and they're developing this. So as far-fetched as it seems, somebody's working on it, which is kind of scary to me. So we don't really know what's going to happen in the future, but I think the key word here is evolution. There are steps to be made, and it's taking that client through those steps. A lot of times when we take a client that is very conservative and we shift them all the way to very progressive, there is a blowback, and they end up about here. So sometimes you have to go through that process. Sometimes it's better just to get them there instead of pushing them all the way and feeling the fallout, but it will happen. And so, I mean, we're so out of time, and we didn't even get through all the things that we had today, but we really appreciate you coming. We hope this was helpful. They are posting this presentation online, so you guys will have access to it, and we'll be around for a couple minutes to answer questions. Thank you so much.
So we're going to standing desk. We're going
Yes.
to walking desk.
Okay.
So are you seeing that as just kind of a thing right now? Or?
It's moderation. So here's the deal. You can't stand all day, okay? And
so they've got these desks
that you can go sit to stand.
Barry's here.
Hi, Barry. Oh, thank you. Thank you. Thank you for coming. We see a ratio of standing for 20 minutes, sitting for 8, and then moving for 2. You know, so it's you know, it is about the movement. It's not about just if you're standing or sitting. It's about the movement.
And what we're finding with our walking desks is that we just need one per sit.
Right. You like what we're seeing is people. There's a bank of them, and just like you go to a gym, you go and you walk on it for 10 minutes, and then maybe you do it one day and you don't do it the next day, and it's there for some people can do it, some people can't.
And so it's working models.
Right.
We're tracking this closely. We went from 1 to 2.
Right.
We're not very good, but anyway, it's fascinating.
You have that, though.
Well, we were doing manufacturing.
Okay.
Because, traditionally started about
we just kind of use cool modern finishes, some cool lighting, cool signage that kind of help, just.
Well, and this is the problem that I now that you have the ability for people to sit to stand and the panels come down because people want to be more connected. There's psychological things that happen.
Yeah, I'll give you my cards.